Well, this is Saturday morning. We're running a little bit late, owing to factors beyond our control. But it may be raining, but it's not raining in my heart because I'm going to be talking to Pat McGart. That rhymes. That rhymes. It's not raining in my heart, but I'm going to talk to Pat
That's straight out of a song, isn't it? It's raining in my heart. That's a
Hey,
song from the 60s.
could it be better? Well, it's the truth, Pat. I always believe in speaking the truth. And somebody's doing a good job. I'm going to give them all recognition. So
Oh, thanks very much.
sunshine in my heart.
Could we have a mutual admiration society? You do the same.
I'll check how you do over the next 15 minutes or so, and I'll let you know.
Right. Right.
Right. So we're going to talk about what the papers and what the media generally are saying. And the first one on the list, I sort of going to, again, factors beyond my control. I've depended on you to pick these, but I'm in total agreement. The first one you pick is Eoghan Harris. Eoghan Harris. And my first thoughts were of Icarus. Remember the classical figure who
yes, he flew too close to the sun.
He just had to get too close to the sun. His wings, the wax on his wings melted, and he plummeted there. Eoghan Harris is in. Well, there's a word for it. Somebody as well say it. He's in Shitsville.
Absolutely.
Tell our listener.
I'm more interested in hearing your opinion on this one. What do you make of Eoghan Harris?
Well, let me give you a backstory first, okay? Eoghan Harris, I've always found in his writings, he almost always says the opposite of what I believe. Second is, I'm bound to him by hoops of steel because about 10, 15 years ago now, he was speaking to Eoghan Fubble, and he had written in his column that the Sinn Féin was going to lose the remaining seats to Fianna Fáil in the next general election, and that they would remain a significant figure in the north of the border, but never in the south. And I bet him. I held up £100 note at the Eoghan Fubble West Belfast Talks Back event, and I said, "Here's a £100 note. You have said it is a fact that Sinn Féin are going to lose the remaining seats. This £100 note disagrees with you, and since you've said it is a fact that Sinn Féin will be wiped out in the south at the next general election, I want you to give me good odds, starting at 10-1." And he said, he laughed and he said, "I'll give you 10-1." So afterwards in the green room, I sort of said, "Well, who's going to hold the bets?" And he began backing off, and I could see he was feeling a little bit cornered. Yeah. So you have to fast forward 5 years. I tried again and again over those 5 years to get him to agree to put lodging our 100-1. I was betting £100, and he was in the hole for 1,000 if he lost. So we couldn't get anybody. But eventually the election took place, and sure enough, Sinn Féin came back with considerably more than they had before. And I contacted him, and I tell you now, he, after some squirming and some squealing and saying, was it euros or pounds, he paid me £1,000. So I would describe it. Now, you can take the cynical view of that and say, well, he had to, because there was 2,000 witnesses to the event where he took the bet. And as it happens, Malachi O'Doherty had an audio recording of the bet being made, and Harris agreeing to it. So I guess he figured he was boxed into a corner, but he did give me £1,000 check, and I photographed it, and I put it in, we had it as a picture alongside my column in the Andersonstown News the following week. So that's the background for Eoghan Harris. I have a little soft spot for him, although he
I have a soft spot for him too, but I haven't dug it yet.
Why are we talking about this fine man? Well,
no, the reason we're talking about this Eoghan Harris was handed a platform, Jude, for 2 decades, and he agenda set a lot of coverage. He used his column, and a very influential column it was too. Ireland's largest selling newspaper to attack those who are not. He led the attack on Hume. He started big time. He attacked Martin McGuinness. He attacked Mary Michael. Anybody who was Catholic and from the north, a nationalist, they were fair game for him. I think maybe even in more recent times, like there's a girl called Aoife Grace Moore. She's from Derry. She's from the Creggan, and she got a job as the political correspondent for the Irish Examiner. This fake account he set up Barbara J. Pym.
This was a
attacked
Twitter
her
account.
almost from
This was a Twitter
this fake Twitter account that he and others established. He almost from the start. She said she received very early on a very sexualized type abusive tweet saying. What was it that asking her how big her arse was, and what else, that she was a terrorist, and something else. I can't remember. There was another insult on that as well. There was three things, and it purely was because she was a girl and she was from Derry. Now I heard an interview yesterday with Sarah McInerney on Drive Time and RTE, where Harris, it was right up there with Dominic Cummings. I went for a 200-mile drive to check out my eyesight. He sort of tried to say that some of the stuff that was seriously abusive was robust, and that he couldn't remember this bit and he couldn't remember that. He didn't know if he wrote this, and he didn't know there were other people involved, but he doesn't want to name them. Jude, I would love to know how long this has been going on and so on. But Jude, really, bottom line, I'll drop it off. He used a column and he named names, Jude, in a newspaper to bully, in a very vexatious way, people who weren't in a position to come back and have a go at him.
Well, here's the thing, Pat. The thing that puzzles me a little bit is the fact that in his column in the Independent, and there were several others as well, still are, who are virulently anti-Sinn Féin, anti-Republican, anti-anything to do with the United Ireland. Given that he was so strident in that for so long in the pages of the Indo, what were they doing on Twitter with this false account that was so different?
Oh, no. Alan English, who's the editor of the Sunday Independent, said if you read some of the stuff on Twitter, that went way, way beyond what you could publish in a newspaper. Sexualized, threatening, abusive, no ad hominem attacks on people, nothing to do with, they just, like, if Grace Moore said she actually two things. After the campaign against her, she not only went to the guards with the tweets, she also had to go for counselling because she, I presume the vitriol sort of somewhere along the line affected her psychological equilibrium, or whatever the term you'd want to use. It got there. That's very, very nasty stuff. And you see this thing he claimed yesterday that he wanted to tell the loyalists and the unionist people in the north that he was on their side, and there were many people down in the south like him and so on. Jude, I will go so far as to say that I think there's something seriously psychologically wrong with the man, because the stuff yesterday was off the beam. I mean off the beam, and any sort of I would say lucid form of normal conversation. He was basically sort of suggesting that he was right and everyone else was wrong. He was basically suggesting that only he was taking on Sinn Féin, and only he saw the dangers of Sinn Féin and so on. And that I was bordering on megalomania.
Yeah, well, he's been at that for a long time. And Mary McAleese is on the record when Eoghan Harris was running the news department of RTE, essentially. Mary McAleese, she's not on the record, she's off the record, but she does attribute the fact that her life was made very uncomfortable as a nationalist. Now, she obviously is a nationalist, but not a Republican in the sense of having any links with Sinn Féin or any links with IRA, any of that stuff, despite the fact that Eoghan Harris called her a ticking time bomb.
When she was running for the presidency.
But despite that, she clearly, now she said that her life was made impossible. When she was a young woman, she was, I think, an academic, and she moved as a reporter to RTE for a year. She
was there at the same time as I was in the early 80s, too.
And she said life was impossible. That if you expressed the slightest sign of sympathy with nationalism, you were going to have your life made a misery. So she simply couldn't take it. Eoghan has a terribly long track record. This doesn't surprise me at all, really, because we know that Eoghan, week after week after week after week, pumps out the same stuff. It's really that it only apparently has emerged in a more virulent form on Twitter, and it was a false account. The shadowy figures, if I can borrow an expression, were working this. But I'm just struck by what did Alan English, the editor of the Indo, did he get a rush of blood to the head? Did he suddenly become moral, where he felt he couldn't possibly stand over the?
No, Jude, I was reading this.
Stand over Eoghan for the last goodness.
Alan English, in fairness, I have to say, he only took over quite recently, and I think he's a pretty fair man. And I would say, and now this is purely subjective, and I couldn't stand over it, but I would think he has been uncomfortable with Eoghan Harris. I see he tried to bring in Joe Brawley to sort of balance things. Plus, if you read any of his coverage at the time Hume died, he was sort of trying to justify the unjustifiable. By the way, for the coverage, he was not responsible for it. He sort of said, look, that was then and so on. And we accept that we made mistakes in the past and so on. So, and Eoghan Harris has been getting away with this. And I think, by the way, Jude, there's another thing as well. I think the train's gone as far as Eoghan's there. Like, Sinn Féin is growing in the south big time and is growing in the north. And this sort of scare, just because you don't agree with their politics and Eoghan doesn't, that I wonder, has Day done that he's now become a liability for the Sunday Independent? Had he been I wonder would they have taken the same decision if he had been a commercial success or a commercial asset for them?
Yes. A good point. There strikes me as being a comparison between the people you're talking about, like Eoghan Harris and various people, Stephen Collins, for example. Yeah. These Southern commentators who are so strongly against and seem to become more and more strongly opposed to any notion of a united Ireland or even talking about it. Yeah. Comparison to be made between them and the way in which they're lashing out and the DUP in its present throes. Yeah. They are both, I think, maybe not terrified, but they're unnerved by the way things are going. And they just can't quite figure out a way to stop it. But they're throwing at it everything they can, including the kitchen sink. Would that be a fair comparison?
Yeah, I think it is. Jude, we are definitely on churn right now politically, north and south. Things are changing, and Jude, the reality is, me and you have been talking quite a lot. The whole idea now, if you like 10 years ago, Jude, the possibility of United Ireland was a passing sort of throwaway remark. Now it's full on center agenda, and we all know it. And there's all sorts of discussion. I even seen some this morning. There's somebody sent me something. I think it might be the Irish Times today, a full page about this whole thing about the Northern Ireland subvention and the cost of United Ireland.
I saw that in the Irish Times this morning. Actually, various people talking about what Ireland would look like in 100 years. Did you see that?
Jude, that even cut it less. 5 years ago, it wasn't even a topic of conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of factors that lead to that, and one of them that leads to it is our next topic, which is the elections in what you like to call the mainland, what I would prefer to call the other island. That is to say, the English and Scottish and Welsh elections.
Jude, can I tell you a true story? I was invited along to a meeting when I became editor of the Derry Journal. I was only in the job about, I'd say maybe a fortnight, make it a month. And I was invited along to meet an senior RUC officer and another junior officer. And halfway into the conversation, he started referring to the mainland. And I genuinely didn't know what the hell he was on about. I had never heard the term. And Ireland, I had never heard. And he started referring to the mainland. And I said, what am I missing here? And it took me, it was in the context of what he said next that I copped on. Oh, he's referring to Other Ireland as the mainland. He saw Britain as the mainland. I had never, I've always, I'm trying to be ironic when he used the term mainland, because I nearly fell off the chair when he used the term mainland. Mainland to me was the place I was living.
Yeah, there's been a terrible garbling of terms. I was at a funeral yesterday, and the priest gave a very good homily, I thought. But they ended it by praying for peace. And he prayed for peace, among people, families, and so on. And he said peace throughout all our island. I think people have been sort of almost brainwashed into using these terms. And once language, George Orwell is very aware of this, that language is the stuff you use to shape your thinking. Yeah. It shapes your thinking whether you like it or not. And if you go on talking about the mainland, you begin to think of yourself as being a sort of on the edge, and you've got to go to
yeah,
get the reality.
the other place is more important. Even the term, the
place,
mainland. In other words, you know, that's the big place. Land. That's an important place. Yeah, the bigger land. Yeah.
And the same
anyway.
Thing. The same thing with regard to the island of Ireland, and not even saying the island of Ireland, just saying our island instead of our country, you know. I'm happy to see Eoghan Harris the way he is, but to get onto the topic of yesterday's elections, or the day before yesterday's elections in England, in Wales, and in Scotland. Let's start with the one that I found really interesting, and I'm finding really interesting, the Scottish election. How would you say, now we're talking at 12 o'clock on Saturday.
12,
right? So they haven't completed the count by any means.
No.
But what's your thoughts about the way things are going for the Scottish
Jude, it looks like Nicola Sturgeon will be very lucky to get a majority. Now, when the Greens come into play, you know, and that's going to be later on today, it might change. But hey, look, the last act, and I didn't get much of a chance this morning. The SNP were 39. Lib Dems were 4, Conservatives were 3, and Labour were 2. Now that's a couple of hours ago when I looked at it, so I haven't really been back to it. Now there's a strange thing comes in. There's a list system comes in this afternoon, and I'm not sure how that plays out. But I was listening to somebody on Sky this morning. They said it's unlikely. I think there's a possibility that she will lose Dumbarton, which could be crucial. But having said that, you know, they're still doing very well. Hey, Jude, when you consider the fact the SNP are on 39 and the Conservatives are on 3, and yet they're the ones that are telling, like, what is it? Boris Johnson said call for a referendum, another referendum would be reckless and irresponsible. Like he's I love the one I saw on Facebook. The fact that the English can decide for the Scottish whether they can have a vote for independence is the best vote, the recommendation for independence you could ever have. Like a British Prime Minister who seems to have no status in Scotland is telling them that what they're doing is reckless and irresponsible.
Well, I've been looking. We're talking about where these pieces of news come from. I listened in the car on the way back yesterday to Radio 4, and they're reporting off the Scottish election and how it was going. Today, I looked at the Guardian newspaper online, and today I listened to further reports from the BBC. And in all cases, they started with Dumbartonshire. That is the place where Scottish National Party had hoped to take the seat. They didn't take it by something like 150 votes. But that was almost shrunken to now. And a great deal of emphasis was placed on the fact that Nicola Sturgeon wanted an overall majority. Well, what party doesn't want an overall
majority?
The fact of the matter is that they may not get a single overall majority, but the Greens are on record as being totally supportive and within the next 5 years of an independence referendum. So it seems to me, I'll be honest, I think the reporting of that has warped against Nicola Sturgeon and independence. It's effectively saying if she didn't get a mandate from everybody for her party, or enough people from her party, no go. But the fact of the matter is, the Greens will probably take about 10 seats. They will have a huge, well over the needed.
If the Greens take the 10 seats, that's a game changer.
Yeah, well, of course, and they're absolutely committed, because I watched them in Question Time. They're represented. They are absolutely committed to holding an independent. And actually, I frankly see that as better than if Scottish National Party.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Because they're suggesting the funnel is only one way.
Exactly.
If you've got two, there's only these nut jobs in the Scottish. But if you've got another party saying we're going the same route as well, I agree with you totally.
So I don't really buy this way of somehow damping down the success that Nicola Sturgeon has shown. Let's face it. Alex Salmond was in with his own party. I mean, he was talking in positive terms. But I mean, every time you saw Alex Salmond on, you tended to worry about Nicola Sturgeon because they were seen as opponents now. The fact is, Alex Salmond is history. His party, Alba, is history. So the stage is clear for Nicola Sturgeon and her party, which are going to get a really good vote. Maybe not an overall one, but I mean, come on, we've got to get a sidekick here who's going to pick up 10 seats at least.
Yeah.
You know, the time for a Scottish referendum on independence, the only question there is when. And I think both parties are totally committed to it happening in the lifetime of this government. That's good news, I think.
Do you think there's a lot of parallels between exactly what's going on our wee island and what's going on in Scotland? You know, there seems to be a lot of nervousness, and there are people, you know, trying to run away from the realities.
Well, Pat, the one point at which I would disagree with you on that is that on our wee island, as you call it, our country called Ireland, is that the Sinn Féin, as far as I can establish, Sinn Féin and what's that small party that was formed whenever your man was kicked out of Sinn Féin? Into those two are, to me, the only two truly all Ireland parties.
Yeah,
I mean, the way they're organised is all Ireland basis, and their interest in Irish unity is forefront and stage centre. The other parties aren't. So that parallel doesn't quite hold up, because in the Scottish Parliament you've got the Scottish National Party, of course, but you have the Greens totally, unambiguously, straight.
No, Jude, that wasn't the point I was making. What I was going what I was thinking about was the establishments in both places are nervous. You know, in Dublin, they're all right. I'll say it. They're shitting themselves, and I think the same is going on in Westminster, because they just don't want this to happen.
The pressure, of course, is coming for Scotland from without and within. Within Scotland, there's a lot of people that hate their guts because they're going to be irrelevances if there is, in fact, Scottish independence. And secondly, it's coming from the likes of Boris Johnson, who is saying, oh, no, he's not going to have it. But as you say, every time he says that, he's pumping up the vote and support for
absolutely.
that referendum. I think actually today, or Thursday perhaps, was a really, really significant day in the history of Scotland. And I think it was a really historical day also in the history of Ireland. I don't believe I'm overstating the case there, because if Scotland has a referendum, and it seems impossible now that they won't have, and if they vote and achieve independence, which seems a reasonably good bet, I would say. I mean, it may not happen, but I do think it will. If that happens, there's going to be a border control here within, if it hasn't happened before that, it's going to be happening in, say, 2 years, I would say, of that. And if it's a border poll held here, and Scotland has shown the example, and if it is beginning to be successful, I don't for a moment believe that we will not win a United Ireland poll.
There's a synopsis to be working on. I can't disagree with you, actually.
Too optimistic?
Possibly, but Jude, you know something? Everything is in sort of what would you say, chaos at the minute, and I don't mean chaos in the bad sense. I mean, like, Jude, things are changing very, very, very quickly.
A state of churn is a fact.
State of churn. I used the word churn earlier on, so I was trying to avoid that.
Elegant variety.
I was trying to get a bit of variety going here, but Jude, I can't. Jude, seeing this last 3 years, and I'm going back on the same point. We have gone. It's almost like a Formula One car. It had been stopped and then put down the accelerator, and it's gone like hell. Well, that's a whole debate in the United Ireland. It was nothing 2-3 years ago, and it's now, to use your term, centre stage. Dude, everywhere I turn, I see it in papers now. It's a conversations place. You go into social media. Micheál Martin tries to run away from it, but he gets asked about it fairly regularly. It is, you know, so and it's even this whole thing about things like our attitude towards COVID, and about the two jurisdictions, and about the different way we have brought into sharp relief. Jude, we could bring in a one island, I know you don't like that term, for foot and mouth, but we couldn't bring it in for human health in regard to COVID. And it brought to mind, you know, and this whole thing, Jude, let's be honest, the protocol has also brought it front center stage, you know.
Well, let me introduce a note of caution. Having said what I've said, and I do think it was historic, and I do think it will be very, very significant over the next 5 years. At the event I was at yesterday, I spoke to a man from the west of Ireland, And he began to talk about the North. Now, I don't think he was particularly, he wasn't political. He wasn't a party member by any means. I don't think he even was interested in politics. But he said to me, how are things going there? And it's very too bad to see that unrest. And the main thing he said, I say, is as long as we stop, there isn't any more violence. And I think I took him aback because I began to explain, what the sources of the violence were, and what the consequences were of accepting the fact that this small core of violence could stop everybody else in their tracks. But that man wasn't on his own. I would say there's thousands, tens of thousands of people in the South who have had that message through the media forever, as long as there's no violence. That's the message. Everything else is fine. Doesn't matter a damn who's in power, as long as there's no more violence. And you've got to cope with that too. Those people will, if there's an All-Ireland poll, they'll go into the polling booth with that kind of attitude in their mind. That's
a diet they've been fed. And by the way, I'm going to double back to our friend Eoghan Harris. You used a term you were saying about language being very important. You remembered he described Mary McAleese. You didn't even have to check it out as a ticking time bomb. That's the sort of guy who's been setting the agenda. And he attacked those and he attacked politicians. The number of people he was able to blackmail into positions, and he has been one of the serious influencer and opinion formers for a very long time. And by the way, he had this same, and he was proud of it. He said even yesterday, I named names in my column. Jude, that was straight out of the Nazi playbook. In other words, publicly shame those who do not follow your position.
But Pat, here's the thing: we shouldn't be talking really about what Eoghan Harris did or did not do. We should be talking about the effects of what Eoghan Harris did do.
Because
the effects go down to that man that I spoke about.
That's exactly
the general population. We're not into politics, but in the air is this thing. Oh God, it's just a hornet's nest, and let's leave the sleeping dog lying. And that's been successful, and that's a really
very successful.
That's a challenge for anybody else who's going to be talking about the North. And maybe we need to look at that and accept the fact that there is that huge body of people. And what can you say to those people? I suppose you could appeal in the grounds of democracy. Or you also, of course, since I was in the west of Ireland, if I'd said, supposing Galway, 6 or I don't know many counties in Connacht, but supposing a certain number of counties in Connacht had been under British rule.
Sligo, Mayo, Galway, what?
And there was a small violent group who were saying, no, we're not young. You dare try to reunite us with the rest of Ireland. Why would he do that, So anyway, I keep in mind that figure who in a not at all nasty way, but simply accepts the principle.
These people, a lot of those people are the salt of the earth, but the North doesn't affect them, allegedly.
That's right. Okay. Very good. What's our third and final topic today, Pat?
Hey, Jude, by the way, here's a quick question for you, and I'm changing the subject. Labour in Britain and England, I read this morning that Bojo thinks he could be in for a decade in power. Now, here's a man who's a liar, a cheat, who looks like he's going to break another international agreement in regard to the legacy issue in regard to soldiers. They've already threatened to break one in regard to the protocol. He basically tried to stop Parliament discussing his deal some time back. Allegedly, he's lied to the Queen. He has cheated on numerous partners, women that he had relationships with. He's got sacked from 2 of his positions, and yet he seems unassailable in the polls in Britain. And has he played the card of Little England, or this English nationalism, and that it's like, and when Labour lost Hartlepool, the Heartland, by a substantial majority last Thursday, what's that telling us about the state of politics in England? Has England become Little England, pure English nationalism? Is that where the Northern Heartlands, the miners and all the rest, have they gone Tory because that's the message they want to hear?
Well, I think there's a couple of points there, Pat. One is the character, the personality of Boris Johnson. The fact, whether we like it or not, the personality of Boris Johnson is a very affable, energetic, cheerful, jokey person. And most people quite respond to that kind of person. And I would myself in a positive way. If you're sitting in a pub and a guy joins you and he's cheerful, he's got a bit of humor, he can analyze situations apparently, and he doesn't mind calling the people he doesn't like this, that, or the other. You know he's a bit of a rogue. Yeah, that's a kind of guy who lights up a room. That's Boris's big strength. Now, the question is, will people twig? I mean, he got a soft number in Hartlepool because in the north of England, this famous red wall, I never heard of it before, but it's the red wall now, and it's been broken by Boris. But before that, those places were voting for Brexit. Yeah. They voted solidly for Brexit, and the Labour Party kept saying, we want to remain. And these guys said, well, forget it. I'm not going to have anything to do with the bloody Labour Party. They're the guys who wanted to stop Brexit, and we wanted Brexit. And they were wanting a second referendum. So what did they expect? So, of course, they took the vote to the Conservatives. They didn't take it to Labour because Labour was failing them. The fact of the matter is, I think Labour is in the pits. And it won't get out of that pit or those pits probably for another 10 years.
Tell me something. I'd stop you there because you just made the point. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn is a liability or an asset for Labour? And do you think anybody with a serious brain sees Keir Starmer as being any different from, say, David Cameron?
Well, first
two questions.
Yeah, well, your first one is, give it again. What was it?
Basic, as Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh yeah, was it an asset or a deficit? I think he's a definite deficit, which is a terrible pity because I think many of the things that Jeremy Corbyn says are actually true, but because of this sort of cloak of failure that's been wrapped firmly around him, this cloak of anti-Semitism that has been wrapped around him and his followers, he just is bad news. So anything he's connected with tends to be dismissed out of hand. And the same way, the other side of the coin, Boris Johnson, anything he says tends to be accepted and seen as a good thing because he's a jolly good fellow.
I've right then. See Starmer.
Keith Starmer to you. Sir Keith Starmer to you, please.
Oh, right, okay, Sir Keith. Like, what does he stand for? I thought the guy the stood in Hartlepool. What does Labour stand for anymore?
Well, I think he's trying to tell people that he's the new Tony Blair. I was listening on the way back yesterday on the Radio 4 to a documentary on his chief of staff, what's his name? The Scottish guy. You do, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Alistair Campbell. He talked about the way they had fashioned what they call New Labour and what the need was and how they'd got to get out of the pit they were in with Thatcher. And it was quite interesting to hear it. Now, the fact of the matter is, Labour's in the pits once again. Keir Starmer sees himself as being in the model of Tony Blair. Smart, educated, a guy that people can identify as a guy of real ability to lead the party. I think that party's going nowhere. I think he's nowhere near the kind of personality that, for all his faults, Tony Blair had. So I listened to some of the Labour people. I mean, they were only names to me, but they were high up in the party structure. And they were saying, we'll be back, and of course we'll be back, and we've got to listen to what the people are saying. I mean, it was just flapdoodle. They hadn't learned anything. They have no policies that I can see. And all that Keir Starmer is saying is, I disagree with that going that way completely, and I'm against sleaze. And of course, the country's voted Brexit, and I must listen more carefully as to what the country is saying.
Dr. Collins, I disagree with you to a certain extent. And by the way, your analysis is probably more correct than mine is going to be, but here's the point. I think Keir Starmer is basically the Conservative Party light. And I personally wouldn't vote for him tomorrow morning if you paid me. I would vote all day long for Jeremy Corbyn, even if he didn't get elected, because somewhere down the track, I think values do count. And if you stand for, if you sort of compromise all the time, like I think Keir Starmer's going to do, that eventually the difference between what the values that I would hold dear and what Boris Johnson would hold dear would meld into one. Jeremy Corbyn was basically a decent, honourable man who didn't take a penny that wasn't his. He didn't even claim expenses. He stood for what, looking after people. He believed in a socialist society. We all help each other. He believed in that the excesses of capitalism should be curbed, that corporations pay their tax, that the health service works for everybody. Now, see all this stuff, the Conservatives hiving off personal contracts to and the NHS to their friends, the stuff during the COVID crisis, contracts to donors and so on. Like, Jude, if the English people think that's grand and acceptable, well, God bless them. See down the track, I would love to know where their society is going to end up, because it's just going to be one massive racket.
Yeah, well, I think you're being kind if you say that Keir Starmer is Conservatives light. I think he is modelling himself on Tony Blair. I would say one thing: he's the leader of the Labour Party, the party of the common man, the working man. And he is Sir Keir Starmer. The
name sort of gives it away, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Secondly, I don't know a single policy he has which is clearly different from the Tories. Not a single one. All I know is that he's good after the sleaze thing, which, that's conceivable. That might eventually
that just might work.
That might. But I mean, that's a poor foundation on which to build party policy.
What about coming out and saying, here's policies about taxation in regard to corporations. Here's a policy in regard to the NHS. Here's a policy about fairness and equity in society. Here's a policy about racism and about reform of the police. I remember working with an English guy when the Metropolitan, was it Sir Ian McGregor, whatever his name was, did a big thing, and he says the Met Police were institutionally racist, and your man turned around to me, that is absolute rubbish. There's a whole sort of an establishment thing that people like Sir Keir Starmer will not take on.
Yeah, I just don't think his ability. I don't think it's lack of courage or a will to do it, but he just doesn't have it. I mean, you only have to.
They know they had a charisma bypass operation, and it was very successful because Jesus, because when 2 minutes after he finished his talking, you just go, what did he say?
Exactly. He's acted a boring speaker. I mean, if you think, with all his many faults, and this was brought up in that documentary, I was talking about with Alistair Campbell on the radio on the way back home, that the Labour Party had for a long time been in the doldrums, and they got this guy who was smart and who'd got a twinkle in his eye and a bit of pep in his step. If you think of Tony Blair, and even the time of the agreement, Good Friday Agreement, then even when he's at his phoniest and talking about the hand of history on the shoulder, he still had a sort of a cheerfulness and an energy, and you kind of warmed to the guy almost despite what he would say. And many of the things he said were good. And even still after the Iraq War and the total pox that he made of that, I still kind of like the guy. There is something kind of appealing about him in the way that he talks, and that he's got a grip on things. Starmer has none of those.
No,
so that's the comparison I would make rather than with the Tories. He probably is Tory light. I think that's doing him a compliment, because the Tories have their stuff thought through. I don't think Starmer really has thought anything through or is capable of it, and he doesn't have the personality even he did. So apart from that, I think he's great.
What does it mean? What did Shakespeare said? Damned by faint praise.
Well, I'm not giving him very much praise for that. Right. Have we started the world yet?
Right, Jude. Okay. We've given her 40 minutes, I would say.
Have we spread enough sunshine for the common people?
Oh, we have. Jude, we normally start with the weather forecast, so I'll finish here. As I look out, it's raining, it's cold. Jude, it was -4 somewhere, I think it was Roscommon on Thursday night, -4, and this is May.
Well, I think you can choose on the political weather front. You can choose, if you wish, to think of the grip that England and Wales are now have. Well, I suppose England primarily are in the grip of Boris Johnson. Or instead of that, you can simply look at north and say, wow, look at Scotland. What way is it going? What are the implications for us? And I think the rain will stop and the sun will come out. Okay,
on that note.
On that note. Okay, thanks, Pat.
Good luck, Jude. Thanks.